Hello, everybody. Hey, and welcome to Career Expert Roundtable. I am Bill, the company's expert, and today I have a new guest. I have Jeff H. Sipe from Practice Interviews. I really hope I'm saying that correctly. Did I get that right?
Perfect.
Perfect. Awesome. Okay. Jeff H. Sipe from Practice Interviews. That's the name of his YouTube channel. Joining me for the first time today. This is going to be really interesting. Our topic is how to get hired in 2025. So if you are a job seeker or you're currently employed, but you're looking to find something else, something maybe move up or find something more fitting to you, you'll want to check this out. And we also have a comment section. So if you are watching this and you have any questions, anything you're wondering about or struggling with for either Jeff or myself or both of us, get in the chat box. If you're seeing our beautiful faces today, you should see some kind of chat box somewhere in the vicinity of our faces, depending on what device you're watching this on. So without any further ado, welcome, Jeff. Thanks for joining me today.
Bill, I sincerely appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today.
Yeah, this is great. So getting hired in 2025 for somebody who has been sort of out of the job search game for several years. They've been gainfully employed for a while, and for whatever reason, they're having to get back into this world. They're having to look for something. Has anything changed recently since maybe, say, 5 years ago when it comes to job search?
Yeah, and Bill, I'm definitely going to throw this question back to you, as I mentioned before we hopped on, but I think the market's getting more competitive. I think that sometimes we see, I can't speak to Canada, but in the US, we definitely see jobs reports that are maybe a little inaccurate or a little misleading. So I just see people's job search taking longer, more like 6 to 9 months than maybe 3 months. And just that when people get interviews, they're finding it more competitive to land jobs. I think that's been the biggest shift that's happened over the last 5 years, especially in the last 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, I heard some kind of conflicting reports about that stuff. And some indicators suggest that everything's fine. Other indicators seem to suggest that everything is not fine and that maybe the true story is being sort of obfuscated with traditional metrics or something. There was some kerfuffle going on about that stuff in the last few months. I don't know if you know any more about that than I do.
I can speak to the US, and I know that when we look at unemployment rates in the US, what happened during COVID is a lot of people dropped out of job search mode and have gone to more part-time work, or they're not actively looking for full-time employment. So if you're not actively looking for full-time employment in the US, you instantly drop out of that stat.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Making it a little bit, they say, well, only this percent of the population is unemployed, but that's the percent of the population that they can validate is actually looking for work. So,
that's an easy way to get out of it, right?
Yes. Yeah. So it is super interesting. So I think when we talk about those numbers, historically, the numbers, for example, in the US are very good, but again, it's a little bit of fake data. You just have to be really careful with that data because it can be a little bit misleading.
Okay, so yeah, that seems to paint a less rosy picture, doesn't it? The other thing that I had heard was that it was connected to not the rise, but the sort of recent surge in fake jobs that was also kind of tied into that too. Was that kind of part of that, as far as you know, or that was just a separate thing?
I have this whole maybe different philosophy on fake jobs, so let's talk about it.
Sure.
I think that a lot of times fake jobs I always want to believe in positive intent. So I think a lot of the fake jobs are just a lack of organization, companies not taking down roles that have since been filled or they've decided not to fill. I think a lot of it's more of a system lag than a true posting of fake jobs. Again, I just haven't experienced or seen a lot of that in my career. So sometimes I think that's overstated, but I don't know. Maybe you have a different opinion on this item.
I honestly don't know. I mean, I think that there's a little bit of everything. I'm sure there's some kind of malevolent stuff going out there. If I'd had to guess, I'd say it's a minority of that stuff that's maybe like a scam or a real unethical kind of thing. But I mean, yeah, I'm sure part of it is just people leaving old postings up. I mean, you're just overworked, or, things change and plans change and the posting stays up, but no one's really receptive to it on the back end. So, I couldn't speak to what percentage of what is caused by what. But I know that a lot of people are talking about it. I've heard a figure thrown around, which is 30%, on average 30%. And I'm assuming that when people talk about this, they're talking about it in the States. 30% of jobs, they would say, are fake jobs, whatever the definition of that is. But yeah, I mean, that's what I've heard. I don't really, I don't concern myself with that stuff too much. So I don't know. It's just kind of what I'd heard. But it's important, I imagine, to do with the economic indicators. It was linked to that. And it was linked to this assertion that a lot of companies were posting a lot of jobs as more of a signal to their shareholders, as opposed to having the job be, intrinsically a real job. I'd heard that too. So I don't know. It all affects people that are responding to posted jobs, I guess. Do you feel that the majority of jobs are fake, or not really? It's still some percentage less than 50%.
Yeah, I think it's a much smaller percentage, because I always kind of go back to the logic, right? So why would 30 or 40 or 50% of companies post fake jobs just to build a database up? And then when are they going to revisit that database? Who's going to revisit that database? So it seems like maybe, again, it's a little bit inflated and fake news. And the one piece of advice I would recommend for anybody watching our conversation today is apply through the company website. Again, that could also be that they didn't update it or take it down. But when you apply through a third party, if you choose the application path, which I'm not a big fan of, but if you do, go to the company website, right? It's the best way to guarantee that you're actually applying to a real job that's available.
Yeah, that makes sense. As opposed to applying for the job directly from an aggregator like Indeed or something like that. I mean, what are the aggregators? I mean, it used to be like you had Monster, you had Jobzilla, you had Indeed. Are those still the main ones, or have they moved on to other things now? I haven't really kept up with that.
Yeah, I mean, I still feel like Indeed's probably the best, most reputable aggregator. Yeah, Monster is weird. I mean, obviously it still exists, but it just doesn't seem like anybody uses Monster anymore.
Yeah, I don't hear much about it. Yeah,
I don't either. And I still think LinkedIn's probably just percentage wise, it would be really interesting to just throw this into like an LLM like GPT and ask it what the percentages are. But Indeed and LinkedIn have to be the two biggest aggregators of job postings. And I don't think it's close. Like whatever's third is probably pretty far off.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I hear a lot about LinkedIn, like in as it relates to posted jobs. So, I imagine if you're looking at Indeed, you're looking at LinkedIn, you're probably doing pretty good. And then anything, locally on top of that is probably good for applying to posted jobs. So, yeah. In terms of other things that might have changed in the last 5 years, what else is there? I'm sure we're going to approach AI at some point, but is there anything else apart from that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've just seen such a different trend, right? I think the last 3 years have been really different. The COVID times were interesting. As bad as COVID was, economic times were very good. Hiring was up. So I really kind of feel like we're working in this snapshot. If we're looking at the 5-year snapshot, it's such an interesting snapshot because part of that snapshot is COVID.
Yeah.
But I just think it's even been more of once we fully got out of COVID, which felt like it was still lingering into 2023. So I feel like we're really looking at maybe the last couple of years as a more accurate reflection of what's going on in the job market. And I think we could open it up to return to office, and all these other AI, of course, is a big one that we're going to need to talk about. I mean,
Yeah.
what are you seeing on your end?
Well, AI is obviously the big one. In terms of within AI, it seems to me like the biggest change in the last 5 years is the fact that you really need to do the keyword loading, key phrase, stuff on your resume. So you have to be tailoring your resume. I get the impression 5 years ago that was still recommended, but it wasn't, this be all end all thing. It really seems like now you have to do that, because the other thing I've heard, and this is all anecdotal on my end, I don't track stats on this, but you know, the average number of applications that a posted job will receive seems like it's gone up. So for whatever reason, whether there's more applicants or it's just people that are applying to more jobs, you're getting more applications. So therefore, they're countering that with ATS, and then we get into the whole AI reading your resume thing. So it seems like that's really the big new thing, at least from my perspective, and I'm kind of a little bit out of it. So that's why I'm wondering if there's more to it than just that, or from your end, do you see other things happening too?
I think it's too easy to apply, right? Let's just call it what it is. You click the easy apply button, you have all your stats in there. And so, what I recommend to anybody is applying it should not be a badge of honor, right? So, I applied to 500 jobs, I didn't get a job. I applied to 1,000 jobs. It's about understanding that there's better paths. And then I think the stats are really, really important for people to know. I mean, I think with easy apply and the trends we've seen, I think we're probably down to about 5% of the population actually gets a job through an application,
Yeah.
whereas 30, 40, 50% you're sourced by a sourcer or recruiter, 20% is referrals, another 20% is just internal transfers, internal movements, maybe 5 to 10% is networking. Like, applying to me is still the worst way to land a job.
Yeah, yeah. As far as I'm concerned, there's the posted job market, there's the hidden job market, and they're two completely different things that don't really meet. And I deal mainly with hidden job market stuff, but yeah. So posted job market. I mean, I've been out of it for a while, and but that's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing that you know there's a huge volume of applications, and so as a result, you're up against AI, and that's kind of the first filter. Have you seen AI being applied in other areas other than responding to applications, or filtering applications? Are they coming into interviews or that kind of stuff? Are we seeing a lot of that from your side of things?
Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot more AI in job interviews. So, one of the use cases that's coming up more and more is having the first interview be with AI to
Hmm.
assess whether that candidate's a good fit and it's a good use of time. AI can provide some scoring and some better indicators of maybe whether it makes sense to move forward with that person. Of course, we may not want to argue whether people agree with that or not today, but I
Hmm.
think we'll see more of that. And then my personal opinion, which again, I want to strongly emphasize, this is my opinion. I think we'll be in a full AI interview environment in less than 5 years, maybe less than 3. No more human interviews, and the reason why is I think AI will do a better job of determining fit than humans will, because it will remove a lot of the bias that humans come in with. So I know it's pretty long-winded, but that's a path we can definitely go down if you want.
Well, yeah. Well, we'll see. I mean, when it comes to predicting the future, I mean, anything's on the table, really.
Yeah.
I think that's something that we're going to be going more towards, definitely. Whether we'll eliminate people from that, I'm not sure about that, but whatever. It will, and also it really depends on what the context is. If you're talking large enterprise for entry level jobs, that's one thing. If you're talking about executive type jobs and you're talking for small, medium sized business, that's something else. Completely different worlds, with different ways of doing things. So definitely. What advice would you have for someone who did decide to go down that path of applying for posted jobs on the internet with job applications and a resume? Do you have any advice for like how someone should be doing the resume or filling in the forms, like answers to fields on web forms or online forms. Any advice for that? In the old days, you used to just be able to you'd have a resume, it would be a monolithic thing, and you'd use it for every job you applied to. And I get the sense that nowadays we're not doing that. That's not what we should be doing.
Yeah, so I have two. Let's talk about why don't we start with the resume? Because the resume
Sure.
is such an interesting subject, and people just want to run for the hills when they hear resume. But there's really two tips and tricks that I find are working well now, again, with the ATS filters.
Mm-hmm.
I always think a bulleted summary on a resume is really important. And where should that appear? Right under your name, your location. And that bulleted summary should be very aligned with your experience and what's needed in the job description. So the easiest way to do that is throw the job description in your resume into something like ChatGPT and say, create 7 resume bullets for me, make sure they're specific and make sure they align with my resume and the role. And then each time you apply, you have a summary section that's very well aligned. And if it does hit the ATS and pass through, when the recruiter looks at your resume or the hiring manager looks at your resume, you're going to have those specific skills at the very top. Then just for ATS, I recommend doubling down and having like a technical and soft skills summary down at the bottom below your education and certifications, just to capture anything else and hit that ATS. Those are my 2 biggest recommendations. And I do recommend a unique resume for every job that somebody applies to, again, for the ATS, and 2, because it's very easy to change out the summary section, which is the only section I would really be changing out application to application.
That makes sense. If you're just joining us, we're talking about how to apply to posted jobs. And there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, for a start, we're talking about ChatGPT already. So, that's definitely something that's come in the last 5 years. So if you are a job seeker that hasn't had to look for a job for the last 5 years, this is something that, is going to be maybe a bit of a change. Can you still make a job application in this day and age without using ChatGPT in any kind of practical way? Like if you didn't have access to that or a similar tool, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I still think it's a match of the job description and your specific skills. And I think that's where people are missing an opportunity at the top of the resume to just say, you need these skills for the job. I have them. Here they are. And that's really easy. You can just go through the resume and highlight keywords. You can even use a simpler tool like a keyword search finder to just say, what are the most repetitive words in this job description, just to speed up time. But really thematically, what are the things that are being said again and again, from the overview to the responsibilities to the min and preferred qualifications. I feel like, though, again, if people who are listening to us right now, hopefully they would have access to AI, and it doesn't have to be GPT. It can be Claude or Gemini or Llama or whatever you prefer. All those tools for resume stuff are going to do a great job.
See, what I'd heard anecdotally from another recruiter was that they were seeing that approximately 50% of job applicants were using ChatGPT or some other AI tool, and the other 50% were not using any form of AI to rewrite the resume. They're doing it all old school, like all manual. And I believe the recruiter went on to say that because of this, they felt that there was a real strategic advantage, that the people who were using AI, the job seekers who were using AI, they had an advantage over their competitors, the other people, other applicants or candidates that weren't using AI, because they would be able to do a better job of doing precisely what you were talking about, where you match your resume to the job description. They could either do it better or they could do it quicker. So whichever way you slice it, they would have an advantage. So it seems to me like the number one takeaway is that if you haven't used, the first thing I think to realize is that you have to customize your resume, like you said. And then I would put forward that you should definitely be using an AI tool of some kind, probably ChatGPT, I think is the most popular. I keep hearing about the most. Use that. And then it would be, if you're wondering what to use it for, it would be what you kind of said a moment ago, of just to paraphrase, if I understand, is you do the thing where you give it a command, you enter in the job posting, the entire text of the job posting, and then you also enter in the entire text of your resume. And then you tell ChatGPT, write a version of my resume that is, it fits this job description. How would you phrase that? I haven't done that myself. So how would you phrase that instruction?
Yeah, so I actually like to, so I'm probably more of a hybrid approach. So I like the old school in terms of when we look at experience, I like a mix of day-to-day responsibilities and accomplishments. And the reason I like both is I kind of want to know what you did on a daily basis. And of course, I want to know what you accomplished. So I do not have or do not ask large language models to rewrite that part of the resume. I just focus on the summary because I want it to stay as close to reality as possible. So you could, and of course, it would do a fantastic job. And you can have GPT just say, hey, I'm going to do some things with my resume. The first thing I want you to do is just look at all my resume experience bullets. Let's get those cleaned up to start. So you could just start there. Then you have fresher text that you add in and you say, hey, this coupled with the job description, build a great summary section for me. But on a position to position basis, my expectation is that job interview candidates are not changing out everything. They're just focusing more on that top summary section. And then if anything needs to be evolved or changed on that bottom skills section, that they do that as well.
Okay, that makes sense. I find that okay, just to sort of, I guess, react to that, you were talking about, like, you like to see people's day-to-day duties for presumably for each job, but mainly obviously for their most recent position, kind of spelled out. So you'd have, I did this, I did that, I did that, I did that. I've found it seems like hard to guess, because I know there's some recruiters out there, they want everything in the form of an accomplishment. Like, I had this impact by doing this. It resulted in this savings or this percentage efficiency gain, or, they want everything like an accomplishment. But then people also want to know what you do. So, but then you're constrained by space. People don't want a resume more than, say, a page and a half approximately. So it's like, you really have to pick and choose. Would you recommend people do both? They have accomplishments and then they have like duties for, say, their most recent job, or would you do all like day-to-day responsibilities? How would you do that?
Yeah, I like a mix. And I actually, you're gonna find, maybe not find this, but I have I think of everything from a science and psychology perspective, just thinking about how human brains work, right? So I want the day to day first, followed by accomplishments. Because if I know Sue does A, B, and C on a daily basis, and then she accomplished X, Y, and Z, it makes logical sense that she was taking those efforts and translating them into accomplishments. So I like a 50-50. It doesn't have to be that clean. And, I'm definitely not I'm older. I worked when we had stapled resumes, and I get the 1-page thing for when you had a physical stapled resume and you didn't want to deal with the staples or whatever it was, right? But like, that's not the reality. So I'm pretty comfortable with I like 2 pages. I think if it spills onto a 3rd page, I don't really get too worried about that. I'm more interested in the content than anything else. And I'm not even going to look if your summary doesn't align. If your summary doesn't align, I'm probably going to stop. So yeah, that's kind
And
of
by
long.
summary, you're talking about that point form list at the top that I think you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Okay. So instead of having a tagline, or would you have a tagline, and then instead of having like a paragraph, that kind of executive summary that kind of summarizes who you are, you'd like, what, about 10 points, like the key kind of things?
Yeah. So I really like So again, I know this is going to sound silly, Bill, and I obviously want your input and your thoughts on this as well. The objective or the paragraph, the challenge is that the average recruiter is going to spend 3 to 5 seconds on your resume. So if it's in paragraph format, their eyes are just going to naturally go past it. So in the summary bullets, what I really like is bullets, and I like not even sentences, but phrases. So 10 years of Python experience, 5 years of managing level 1 and level 2 software engineers, like just like such basic, but specific information. So it's brief and specific, but it doesn't go over one line. So my eyes can track. And then I've actually maybe as the recruiter spent 15 seconds on your summary without even realizing it, just because the bullets were very easy to read and they were specific.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. I imagine you would want to, as much as possible, mirror the requirements section in the job posting, and just like you want this, and this. Well, I have this, and this, and if you can say literally exactly the same thing, great, fits it perfectly. So, I mean, something like that. For ATS, though, for applicant tracking software for people who are just coming into this, you don't have that like to worry about 3 to 5 seconds and what's eye catching and all that. They can scan the text. So what's your recommended strategy for creating a resume that will pass an initial ATS filter?
Yeah. And so again, when we think about the job description, right, those filtered words in the summary are going to show up in your summary. So that's one. And then that's why the skills section at the bottom is so great, because yeah, they may need something in the job description. You're not like really an expert. Maybe you're a beginner at it, but again, if we stick with coding and it's just easy to talk about, maybe you've done a little bit of JavaScript, right? So you could even throw the skills section at the bottom, your coding skills, and include JavaScript. And if the role mentions JavaScript, well, it's in your resume because you actually have that experience. Of course, we want to be honest. But that top summary and the bottom skills section, those will absolutely help you hit the ATS 100% of the time. Whether it clears you or not, that's a whole other conversation, Bill, that we could get into.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, so for a resume, for conforming to give a human what they're looking for when they look at it, and being able to pass ATS filters, it kind of dovetails beautifully, because like you said, if you have that point form summary at the top that's in phrases, a point never goes more than one line, so visually a human can scan it very quickly and efficiently. And then also having a skill section at the bottom. This would be at the end of your resume, so it would be at like on the second page, presumably. Is that what we're talking about?
I like it as just the bottom.
The bottom of the first page?
Just the end of your resume. So after just a typical standard normal resume, right? Summary, experience, education, and certifications. And then of course, I'm not a hater at the very bottom of adding hobbies or any of that stuff. I think there is a percentage of people who like to see that. It's not something that I recommend, but I mean, if people want to put it on there, I don't want to hate on it.
Yeah, I guess that's one of those things that's probably, it varies based on the level and the context that you're in. So yeah. Okay. So that's resumes. Is there anything more to resumes that might have been new in the last few years or 5 years? We talked about AI. We talked about keyword, or did we talk about like the keyword matching, how the words that you use to express an idea need to match up to the lingo that's used in the job posting. So if they say something using certain words, that's the words you want to use to describe the fact that you've done that exact thing, right? Because a lot of things, there's more than one way of saying it or expressing it, right? This is an issue.
Yeah, I feel like that's just where I don't want the job. Right? If I have to go to the extent where I'm changing the verbiage to match their verbiage, I just think that's again, if people want to do that, but then they have to start questioning whether if an ATS is really going to, if the ATS has been set up that way, do they really want to work at that company? I know it's
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I know what you mean. But like, even things like accounting, like I've made this point uh, before, like accounting, you would think something like accounting, which is regulated, they'd have like a lot of standard terminology when they don't. One company can talk about, making a profit. The other company can talk about making net income. I mean, they're talking about the same thing. Your resume talks about how you've had an accomplishment where you made over $5 million net income. You apply that, you send that resume to a company that's looking for someone that's made a certain amount of profit, and it just gets rejected outright because you're not using the same. It's looking for the certain keywords, and profit was a keyword, and you didn't have the word profit anywhere on your resume. So, it's just, I agree with you that it's kind of, do you really want to work there? But at the same time, it requires the person setting up the ATS filters to understand the finer points of accounting. And I don't think it certainly doesn't seem to be realistic in a lot of cases. So, but that's something you could encounter.
Yeah. I mean, and again, it just speaks to, if there is a repetitive word somewhere in that job description, it should be in your summary or your skills section. And if it's not, then you're missing an opportunity. But does it need to be built into the experience section in that exact way? I mean, again, I try to think about, like, what is the amount of work that a person is really willing to do? And so I think building out a summary and skills section is something that, if people really went through the process of that a couple times, they'd be willing to do it, to go through and like fine tooth comb their resume and change out all those words. And even though you could have AI do that for you, I just don't know people's willingness to do that. It might cause them to shut down and run for the hills.
Yeah, fair enough. Interviewing. What has changed in interviewing? Are we still doing the same standard stuff? It amazes me how we still seem to have the same standard job interview questions that just roll on and on and on, decade after decade. But I know that there's new stuff coming out. I know there's different types of interviews coming out, with like video interviews with AI, video interviews with humans. Are you seeing a lot of changes on that front in the last couple of years?
No.
No,
I mean, it's
same old stuff.
yeah. I mean, I feel like it's still your common questions, behavioral questions, hypothetical questions. And then again, depending on the role, maybe technical questions. Product managers might get estimation questions, right? But it's pretty standard. I think from what I've seen, a couple of the common questions seem to be less common now, like the weaknesses and strengths questions. I don't see those as much, but the tell me about yourself, why the company, why should we hire you, those are still there. And of course, behavioral is the tried and true. That has not changed in the vast majority of companies, from what I've seen, still to this day lean on behavioral questions.
Yeah, that seems to be the backbone of a lot of interviews still, is behavioral questions. So if you're watching this and you're wanting to prepare for interviews, behavioral questions, do your homework and learn how to answer those. Do your homework ahead of time so you can go to the interview prepared, because it will definitely be a component, I think, of any interview you go to is going to be a behavioral interview component. In terms of the questions within behavioral interview questions, have you seen any kind of innovation or new type stuff that we're doing now that we might have not done several years ago? Have those evolved any? Tell me what you would do, or tell me about a time you did this. And, it's the same stuff. It's like, what, conflict? What types of questions are conflict, accomplishments? What, it's the same old stuff for those type of questions.
Yeah, I think maybe you'll see maybe a little bit more, and this maybe we'd go back 10 years, but a little bit more on trends and looking into trends, just because of the access to data. So that's probably newer. I think there's definitely more of a lean towards how you're utilizing AI and automating things in your job. Tell me about something you automated over the last year using technology. Like
Okay.
that's getting more common.
Are you seeing that across the board, or is that just for like IT or developer type jobs, or is it just industry specific?
I feel like that question is going to come up more and more across the board because everybody needs to be doing it, in my opinion. I also would say, Bill, just the one other piece I see is more of a push towards questions around collaboration and inclusivity. And you know, a little bit more softer skills of situations where you had to really use positive intent. So maybe a little bit of a lean there.
What's not to sound like an idiot, but what's positive intent? What does that refer to?
Yeah, so much of what these companies look for is that, or the way I see it is, people who are positive get hired more. So if it's like, tell me about a time you had a conflict, and their ability to say, and I'll you'll see me, I use my fake person as Sue. I use Sue as this character in my world. So, but it just, the positive intent that like Sue wasn't following behind on her responsibilities or whatever she was supposed to perform because she intended to. So the idea and concept of you coming in and thinking Sue was overloaded with work. Sue may have personal items going on, or just like coming in with the mindset that Sue was trying to do her best job and that you needed to uncover what was going on in Sue's professional and or personal life that might be getting in the way of her getting things done. And so I just love, it's just a broader theme that you and I can talk about, but positivity in interviews is everything. Negative, it's like the person's just dragged down, but positive brings them up and lifts them up. And so, yeah, is everybody going to be the most positive in a job interview? No, but being positive in a job interview is something that I extensively coach on.
Yeah, that makes sense. I need to get myself a go-to person for interview examples, like, you know, instead of Sue, you know, what name could you pick? Geraldo. There we go. That'll be my person. You know, me and Geraldo. Here, let me tell you a story. I do this and Geraldo does that. It'd be a great way to frame a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
No, that's interesting. So, okay, fair enough. So a lot of behavioral questions, questions of that nature. Now, that example that you just gave of that type of question, is that like a question that would come into exclusively like a supervisor or manager type interview? Or are you talking about that type of question is now being asked more at sort of the lower level, worker level, entry level? Is that where that type of question would be?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always going to be a trend at all levels to ask negative questions, right? So, and not, we don't have to take it with a negative mindset, but the conflict question, the failure question, the tough scenario question, the missed deadline question, right? So I feel like they want to see how you respond to tricky scenarios, and not only could you tackle it with positivity, but you know, obviously, as we think about using something like the STAR, PAR, or CAR method, right? How did we get to handling those items through our actions and then get to those positive results?
Okay, makes a lot of sense. Okay, is there anything more under interviews that are like relatively new trends or things we've only seen in the last 5 years that you can think of? We've talked about a sort of move towards more behavioral questions, perhaps slightly away from, you know, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, that kind of thing. Other than that, interviews are pretty much the same.
Yeah, Bill. I mean, again, I would kick this back to you too to see what you've seen. I mean, I think the other piece is, there's two other major pieces, right? It's I just think so much of going into these interviews, whether it's behavioral or any other type of question, is having a method. And then I think the type of question that people are the least prepared for is hypothetical questions. So when they flip it and they say, well, how would you do X? Or imagine I put you in front of Y scenario, what would you do? And I think the biggest challenge I see from job interview candidates is they think they can wing it on hypothetical questions. And just like for the just like using the STAR method for behavioral answer, I think using a method for hypothetical questions too is important, because I think pretty much 90% of companies will at some point ask you a how or what or I want you to imagine question where it's scenario based and they actually want you to problem solve and not bring in an example.
That's interesting. If it were me, I would almost think that hypothetical questions would be easier than behavioral questions, because there's a lot of questions that, that I've been asked, and how you would handle it, but the challenge is trying to find, a story from your past where you handled either that or something very similar, and you can't say what you would do, what would be the process to do it. You have to say what you did do, and so I find that's that makes the behavioral question like harder, because there's that second requirement. It has to be a thing that you've actually done. So that's quite surprising to me that people would struggle more with a hypothetical question, but they'd be okay with behavioral questions. Maybe it's because they prepared for the behavioral questions, but couldn't prepare for the hypothetical. Is maybe that the source of that?
100%. It's the lack of preparation for being asked a scenario-based question, and its depth, Bill. So they answer at such a surface level that the answer's totally uninteresting to their interviewer. And this is also a really important item for the audience to understand is our interviewers have a much easier time paying attention to behavioral answers because it's a story. And culturally across the world, we all grew up listening to stories. So it's very easy to listen. The challenge is on the hypothetical side when we start talking about things that we might do or would do. There's no story behind it, so our interviewer can go to sleep very quickly. So using specific strategies to keep them awake when answering hypothetical questions can also be valuable. I think that's why people oftentimes struggle with those questions.
That's interesting. Until this moment, I never thought of hypothetical questions really in job interviews. It's always behavioral questions. That's kind of, but thinking back just now, there's two things that come to mind. Number one, about 1 million years ago, before the year 2000, I got I did an interview with Microsoft, and they wanted to fly me to Seattle to do another interview there, and I turned them down. But on the phone, they asked, I guess, what is a hypothetical question? They asked me, you have to design. Remember this? You have to design, like, one of those little Nerf basketball or like hoop things that you put in your office, right? Some people put in their office. There's a backboard and there's a hoop, right? And you throw the little foam ball into it. They said you have to design one of those. You have to design a system where it can keep score between two people. So two people are playing Nerf ball. It has to intelligently know, who's got this many points and who's got that many points. How would it determine that? And I banged off like 10 different ways you could do that or something on like just in real time on the phone. And they're like, wow, that's amazing. And then they said, okay, based on that, they wanted to fly me to Seattle to do like a second interview or something. I've also been in the early part of my career in job interviews where I remember there was one case in particular where I was interviewing with some executive, and he was asking me those. He was asking me hypothetical questions. How would you, handle this situation? And I remember it really felt stupid because this particular individual, I suspect they worked at that company for a very long time. And so they were attuned to the culture of how stuff is done there. And they're asking a question that it could be handled slightly different ways, and that would still be fine. But in one industry or in one organization, it would be more appropriate to handle it this way, or their convention is to handle it maybe that way. Things like this. And I felt like it was almost like they were expecting you to be a mind reader. And I remember he actually corrected my answer. He said, well, no, I'd want you to do this first. I'd want you to tell me before you did anything. It's like, okay, fine. But based on your answer, it was like, oh, okay, maybe you're not a good fit. It was kind of the conclusion. And it's like, I remember feeling like that is the stupidest way to assess somebody, because every organization has their own policies, their own procedures. And when we move around, we can easily, for the most part, adapt to a company's specific little rules and, guidelines and things. But that hypothetical question was asked in the context of like, do you know our culture? Do you know how we would want things done? It's like, well, no, I don't, because I've never worked here before. So I can see how you'd have to really watch what you're doing if you're trying to use that as an assessment of somebody's abilities or capabilities. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and so
Anyway.
I actually have a method that I like to use, and that's what, again, I think I talk a lot about the STAR method, and it's just because it's the tried and true for behavioral questions. So I like a method with hypothetical questions. I call it CFAS.
Mhm.
And so one way to get alignment with an interviewer when they ask you a hypothetical question is to ask clarifying questions. So you could say, okay, that's great. We want to build this Nerf or whatever basketball net, and we're thinking about two players. Do we have any time associated? Do we want to play the game for 1 minute, 3 minutes, 5 minutes? We start to dig in with very specific either or yes or no questions to see if we can start to go down their preferred path. So, like with that person you spoke with, find out a little bit more if we can get their direction. Then I like to go into F, which is a framework. So we set the outline. We say, okay, if we're going to tackle this type of question, here are the key items we want to consider. And then the big one, I think, is assumptions. We bring in some assumptions. We know about the company, we know about the job, and we make very specific assumptions and solve for something specific. And the reason why that can be very powerful is it creates visuals for our audience. So when we solve hypothetical questions generically and we say, I might do X, Y, or Z, it's like, okay, that's great. But if I solve for putting together a piece of a pepperoni pizza, I know I have specific ingredients. I got to get that dough. I got to get that marinara, the cheese, the pepperonis. I got to throw it in the oven. Like when we create assumptions around it, I've really found that having a method to answering those types of questions can be really, really helpful for job interview candidates.
Yeah, makes sense. So we talked about, okay, so we've got a couple of things that are maybe shifting slightly with interviews. We covered resumes, we covered interviews. What else is there? Cover letters. I mean, have cover letters changed? It seems like there wasn't really a universal a consensus on what a cover letter should be, what its purpose is, how long it should be, what the structure of it should be, what should be in there. It really felt like that 5 years ago. And from what I've seen, it feels like we're still kind of there. Different organizations require it or don't require it. And then the ones that do, it takes vastly different forms. Is that what you're seeing, or is it more sort of, or is it different than that?
I think the cover letter is dead. I think it has been for a very, very long time. I understand that some organizations still ask for it. I even believe that the organizations that ask for it aren't reading it. It's a volume game. So
Yeah.
people, they're not even reading the resumes. They're not reading the cover letters. Now, again, if we talk about the landscape of the job market, there's less recruiters. Recruiters are being asked to do the job of 2 or 3 people because now the scheduling's automated. All the other things are starting to get automated. So I strongly recommend against cover letters unless it's a prerequisite or a requirement to apply for the job. Otherwise, don't send them, because that's why we have LinkedIn profiles. They're going to look at your LinkedIn before they're ever going to read a cover letter, in my opinion.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, what else is there? Well, we've got resumes, cover letters, interviews, things like offers, negotiation, that kind of stuff. Has that shifted or changed? You see any broad trends as far as that stuff is concerned?
Yeah, I mean, I think with negotiation, it's more common now, and so I feel like people need to start warming up and getting more comfortable with negotiating. I think it had a little bit bigger stigma, but I think now there's just so much data, right? We have access to more data than ever. And so there's just so much information and data. And so I think that people need to feel more comfortable negotiating. And do your research and understand that company. There are some companies where you can negotiate and throw crazy numbers out and they're never going to get upset. And then there's other smaller companies that might rescind your offer, right? So we can talk some strategies if you want, Bill, for negotiating. I have a few, but I'd love to hear yours as well.
Negotiation, as I'm sure you know, is a massive topic, and I don't know if we'd really be able to get far into it here. But I think that what you just said, like, it's becoming more common. I think that's good. I think that's a cue for people to go out and do your own work, like Jeff just said, do your own research and learn about this stuff. Learn that it is possible to do, and a note that I would put in is that negotiation is not persuasion. It's more than that. It's about having options. So go out and get additional options, and then you can negotiate from a position of power. I mean, what else is involved in this? The discovery of jobs. I think that's a pretty big one on people's list of concerns. Where do you look to find posted jobs? Do you just look at Indeed and LinkedIn, or do you do other things? If so, is there anything else that, where you would recommend people be looking?
Yeah, so like if I'm being 100% transparent, I think applying to jobs is a complete waste of time. There's only a couple scenarios where I don't think it's a waste of time. I think the people who should be applying to jobs are people who have the exact matching skill set. Even though I don't love that, I actually want to hire employees who can't do all the job because I want them to have space to learn. But I think it's having the identical or a very similar or like background. And then I think it's big companies. Look, you can sway if you've worked at a Google or a Meta or an Apple or an Amazon, you should apply because those are that street cred and it's going to work in your favor.
And you were at Google, right?
I worked at Google for 5 years. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm sure you know their culture and you know what it looks like on the inside. Were you impressed, or was it kind of a bit of a lackluster kind of thing? What was your impression of them when you were inside?
Well, Google changed a lot while I was there. It's crazy to think it wasn't really that long ago, but when I joined in 2013, it still felt close. I was on main campus. I would sit in meetings we had like Thursday stand-ups where I'd be 10 feet away from Larry and Sergey at town halls like once a week. I mean, it just felt different. And then it kind of felt like it got big. I would say, there's two major benefits of working at a big tech company. One, you're going to get paid, period. Like that compensation package is going to be excellent. And what's more important is the value of a brand. And that's why it's so important. Get one of these brands on your resume or on your LinkedIn profile, and you're really going to be set up for success. And so, Bill, that's a really good transition into something that we haven't talked a lot about, which is if you want to find the jobs that aren't out there, LinkedIn is going to be your best friend, and you need to leverage it and network, and not network in the way people think. The cold reach outs, look at my resume, get me a job. I like your background, meet with me for 30 minutes. It's very hard to get people's attention. So I do recommend that people try and find companies, try and find hiring managers that they like, and actually don't ask for anything, that they send them something. Say, hey, Sue, I came across this really cool article on the intersection of program management and AI and just wanted to share it with you. Have a great day. It's that giving model that will open doors faster than asking, even though a lot of people don't want to play that game because it's a bit of a long game.
Yeah, I agree with that. Definitely. People will respond to you if you're offering something rather than calling up and saying, I need this, right? So yeah, that's sort of like the very beginning of how a lot of networking works, at least in my experience. So yeah, that's very important if you're looking to tap networking, if you're looking to get into that. If you are an extrovert, social butterfly type, or you're an introvert, maybe technical introvert type, that you really don't play in that world and it's kind of rather off-putting, The great thing is that you can do a lot of that stuff with social networking now. You don't have to, go to events and things like that and meet people, in person, if you don't want to. I mean, you can still definitely do all that stuff. It still exists. But if you're just looking for sort of a lower level job, you can tap this to open up a whole wealth of opportunities for you. So learn about, to anybody watching, like, learn about that stuff. That's a significant way of how people get jobs. I was actually not expecting you to say that, Jeff. I figured, like, you're an ex-recruiter, or you're a recruiter, you would advocate for the posted jobs going through a recruiter type approach, so this kind of caught me a bit off guard. You're talking about, don't apply for posted jobs, go the networking route. I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's I think, again, I'm bullish on AI. I'm still, I have my concerns of what it's going to do for the world. But people do not agree with this bill, so let me just preface that. But I don't believe recruiters will exist in 3 years. I actually don't believe that they're relevant today. And again, that's very, very tough. And it's unfair too. And the reason why it's unfair is because there is a percentage of recruiters who are excellent. The challenge that you and I know in the recruiting space is the vast majority of recruiters, it's an entry-level role, it's a sales role, and they're gone within a year. And so I think you'll see automation replace them. So I want people to be thinking about more creative ways to find jobs, because when it's all automated and you can't speak to a human and you get hit by the ATS who starts assigning things, right? And starts like saying, okay, you're in the interviews, and taking you through that whole AI process. That's where you're going to want to network and try and get around some of that stuff.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. We got a couple of questions here, so I'm just going to put them up on the screen. John Benedict says, the more descriptive you ask ChatGPT to be, the better results you tend to get. Yes, I would agree with that. The more specific and the more, like, iterative, you do several iterations where you refine it as you go, I think is also key. We got another one here. Art Sim says, I'm not getting picked for the interview, even though I qualify. What gives? Would you like to take a stab at that? I don't know how much time you have, Jeff, but we can maybe give a general sort of answer there.
Yeah, Art. And so again, I think we want to really just poke at that word in a really kind and friendly way to say picked. So if picked means applying, I would just encourage you, and what I encourage everybody to do, set a networking plan. Reach out to 3 people this week on LinkedIn, just 3, and try and identify hiring managers you may not even know. A lot of cases, you're not going to know if they're a hiring manager, but just identify 3 and send them a cool article or video, and don't ask for anything. It's a really good strategy, and trust me, it works. There's one other one, Bill, that I'd love to throw out there really quickly.
Sure.
LinkedIn recommendations. I don't think that people are scrolling that far into people's LinkedIn pages, but it's a great way to reconnect. So again, Sue, let's say Sue is at a company that we used to work with Sue. She's at this new company. It looks cool. I just would write an unsolicited recommendation for Sue, and that might open up a door for Sue to say, hey, we should reconnect. And then you chat and you say, Sue, tell me more about your company. That's one of my sneaky tricks. Just always use LinkedIn to reach out. And you're saying, is LinkedIn version good enough? I would just recommend, if you're in job search, I think the low end one is like $30 a month. What it does is it allows you to attach a 300 character note to every single reach out that you do. I think it's worth that. I think the default is maybe like 3 to 5 in-mails if you don't have that, but I would pay for that simple upgrade.
For Art Sim, I would say for this, if you're not getting picked, make sure you're doing keyword matching in your resume. That would be, if you're going for posted jobs and you're doing the whole thing of responding to posted jobs with a job application that includes a resume, I'd make sure that you mirror as much as humanly possible, as much as you can, the requirements in the job description. using their lingo. That's what they're looking for. They're saying we're looking for people that have these 10 things. So you start off your application or your resume or both with, I have these 10 things, if you can say that, obviously. Use their words, and use a lot of Jeff's tips for that, because I thought those sounded quite logical and practical. Having the summary at the top of your resume, bullet points. If you mirror the requirements for the job description, the things that you have, you phrase it like them. You don't have it run longer than what runs off one line, so that if a human looks at it, they can quickly get like a thing. By the way, Jeff, what do you think of like highlighting? You highlight that word, those keywords, so someone can immediately scan down. I did this like 30 years ago, and I got people it totally divided everybody. I got people saying, "What's this crap you put on your resume?" I got other people saying, "Wow, this is wonderful what you've done." What do you think?
Yeah, I don't mind the bolding. I just want it to make sense, right? Just look at it and say, is this obnoxious? Or we just use the tiniest bit of common sense to say, oh, this looks terrible, or oh no, this looks really good. And remember, if their number one minimum qualification is 10 years of Python, then yeah, heck yeah, I'm going to bold Python because it's 10 years and I have 10 years of Python experience. So it could also be a little bit of picking and choosing as well. But I agree with you, Bill, 100%. You are not going to get alignment across the board on that one way or the other.
You're not going to get alignment across the board on anything. That's, I think, what people, in my opinion, people need to accept. So whatever you decide to do, some people are going to love it. Some people are going to hate it. Who knows what the proportions are going to be, but if you think it's the right thing to do, I'd say go for it. Jeff, while we're talking about this, something I was going to make a recommendation for Art. I was about to say, don't dilute the things you put on your resume that directly answer their requirements. Don't dilute that with a bunch of other things that they did not ask for. Now, we were talking about controversial type stuff that divides people. I've heard both sides of this, where people say that's a thing, definitely. And I've heard people say absolutely not. If you've had 5 jobs, there's no harm in putting them on there if you also have all the requirements, that they're looking for. What do you say to that issue of diluting your skills?
Yeah, let's talk about it in a couple of different facets, right? So like in the summary, of course, we absolutely would want to only focus in on requirements for that job. And I would say you're not diluting it if at the bottom you have 10 years of Python and 10 years of C++, and they're not looking for C++. That's not diluting it. That's showing you have 10 plus years of another coding language, which might make you more well-rounded. But I think in terms of jobs, we actually need to look at it in 2 ways. Were the initial jobs aligned with your career progression, even if it wasn't perfect? Because if it's not, maybe you do remove them, right?
Yeah,
and then
see, that's probably what I think, where people are talking about that dilution is definitely a thing. You're right. It's probably in that type of situation where, I've got C++ and I've got Java or whatever, but I've also been a lion tamer for 15 years. And, and I trained goats to sing in Tibet. So, you put all that together and it's like the end result is, I don't think you're a fit for this job, because I don't know if we want a mountain climbing, goat training C++ developer or whatever, might not fit with the culture of the organization, or maybe it does, we could ask Geraldo. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But, I guess it depends on the details, like a lot of things.
Yeah. And I would just double down on a couple of items, which is ageism is real, right? And so those initial jobs in our careers, if you're still looking to do corporate or work for somebody else, right? Scraping out those early jobs that are less relevant, removing college or even, MBA or PhD dates is something I recommend. And, I graduated college in 99, and you look at my LinkedIn profile, and my LinkedIn profile starts in 05, because the other jobs were they were more I had a job in banking, I had a job in technology, not related to current tech, and it just didn't make sense. So I
Is
removed
there
them.
AI tools that can de-age your photo, like a headshot? That's what I'm waiting for.
Oh,
'Cause then I
absolutely.
can then I can put, like, a picture of me on my resume where I'm like 18 years old all over again, you know?
Those tools absolutely exist today. Yeah.
Okay, well then maybe there's a solution. And we need more 21-year-old CEOs of Fortune 500 companies too.
Yeah.
There's not enough young people. If you look at the
Yeah.
demographic, they're all 60 plus or whatever. We need to change that.
Yeah. Yeah.
We got a bunch of stuff here from Art Sim. Let's see if I can do this here. We talked about is it good enough? The thing that I miss is being able to do the unrestricted people searches, like getting the results where they're not in your network. I think you get that. I mean, I did this years ago, but you get that with the premium. If you're on the free version, any people results you get in a people search, they have to be first, second, or third degree connections of yours, or they won't show up. So I think that at least that's how it used to work. I'm not sure if you know that. That's the thing that would be a killer app for me.
Yeah, I've had like major upgraded LinkedIn accounts for forever, and then finally I decided I wasn't going to upgrade. I was just kind of annoyed with LinkedIn, and
Hmm.
I found that I couldn't live without it, the small upgrades, but I went down to the bare minimum account, and I find that that really does everything that I need. And again, I think the yearly, if you do a yearly, I think it's like $20 to $30 a month. I believe it's worth it, especially for anybody in job search mode. I just think it's too valuable not to have it.
They still have, I think they still have that whole like month free trial. So like if where you can get premium for a month free trial. So if you're just doing a job search or you're just doing a thing, might not be like a thing you're going to need, you know, like all the time in the future. Maybe try that, get the month free, and then cancel like before the end of the month, so you don't have to pay for it, and then do all your searches or whatever you want it for in that month. If you could set yourself up for that, then you could save like $30 or whatever it is. If that meets your needs. What do we have here? Art Sim. I actually have a good paying job. I'm just burnt out, so I want to explore other opportunities. So if you're burnt out, you're going to do a job search while you're working full time. Is that going to help you relax more? No, I totally get what you're saying, Art Sim. I don't know if you want to give me your 2 cents on what you think of that, Jeff. What would you
Yeah.
say?
Yeah. Let's address, actually, I would think we can quickly address both of these. So, yeah, absolutely. Like when we're burned out on our job, the number one thing is I just love creating a job search plan. So you're burned on your job. I would say pick a time in your green zone, a zone where you tend to be more high performing. Just take a half an hour every weekday to just say, I'm giving this time back to myself to focus on job search. So building it into your calendar during the day, if at all possible, that's really valuable. In terms of starting your MBA, I absolutely would include that on both my LinkedIn profile and resume. The biggest thing with an MBA is you have to be very clear at where you're at. One of 16 classes finished, and don't use credits because credits are very different school to school, but 2 classes out of 16 completed, 3 out of 20 completed, whatever it's going to be. Just be very specific and put an anticipated graduation date, even though we know that can be fluid.
I always thought that you have to be very clear that you say MBA candidate, like anything that you don't actually have because it's in process. You have to put that word candidate, or else there's a risk of bad stuff happening where they can suspect that you're trying to say that you have something when you don't actually have it and all this kind of thing. But I think that was the way it's been communicated to me was that was kind of the magic word. You have to have that word candidate there, or it can lead to some bad stuff. Would you agree with that, or is that
absolutely, I love that. Yeah, so I have a story that I'll quickly bring up.
Sure.
basically, my coworker at Google, we work next to each other, still are friends to this day. He had a person living in Seattle. They accepted the job. They sold their home. They were literally at the airport to take the flight from Seattle to Mountain View, and their offer got rescinded because
Mm.
they had not been clear that they had not completed their master's degree.
Oh,
And
wow.
they saw that as a lack of what Google would call googliness. They thought it was like not following the high moral standard, and they rescinded the offer. And I don't know what happened to that person. I'm obviously not going to give any additional details because I actually don't even have them, and I couldn't
Mm.
anyway. But that just always, for me, ever since that moment, I made sure that people are so specific that they have not completed that degree, and that they just go out of their way to say that. So I love using the word candidate. And then it's just like, I don't know how much you've completed. Even with an anticipated completion date, put the number of courses you completed. Even if you're in your first one, or in class number 1 of 15 or 16, just say that, because that's just that transparency. People will actually like you a lot more for having that level of transparency.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's a great idea. Like the more specifics you put, just to make sure it's very clear what we're talking about here. I don't actually have it. However, it's in process. This is how much I've done, and I anticipating having it here, like that kind of thing. So I think that's great. I think that there'll be no miscommunication or misunderstanding, if you put all of that. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So no, that's great. What something I was going to mention earlier when you were talking about it, you had mentioned on LinkedIn doing the recommendations, right? Writing recommendations for people. And when you first said it, I was thinking like, okay, the sort of negative part of it was that I know back in the day there were some concerns around reciprocal kind of recommendations, like you write me one, I'll write you one kind of thing. So it led to this kind of explosion of like everybody had all these recommendations. And I know some recruiters were learning maybe perhaps not to read too much into it, because it didn't necessarily mean that you were that wonderful if you had like 15 recommendations for people. I know there were some concerns about that back in the day, but then I thought, okay, that's actually not a bad idea, because if you learn how to write recommendations for people, number one, that's a skill. It's not easy writing a non-generic recommendation that is unique to that person, and therefore meaningful. Like if you just say, "Oh, I work with this person, they were great," like that's not much of a vote of confidence. But if someone reading it says like, "Oh, I work with this person, it was on this specific project, they did this specific thing, which led to this like amazing kind of result, which really impressed me, and for that reason I would always want to work with that person ever again given the opportunity," something like that. I think the skill to be able to write that is very, very good. So and let's face it, it plays into the whole thing of like giving, like you're offering something, and that makes people more inclined to respond to you and interact with you. So I think on balance, I think it's a good suggestion. Actually, there's a couple of good things that could come out of that.
Yeah, and again, like, love it or hate it, but you can say, here are the GPT, here are the 5 things that I loved about Sue. Help me write a great LinkedIn recommendation for her. And it's not based on what GPT is coming up with. It's based on actual things that you loved about Sue. It's just helping you shape it. Or you write it from your mind and then you throw it into GPT and say, hey, does this look clean? Or can you help me clean it up? And then it does make it easier to get more recommendations done quicker. And I would also say, it's not about the public recommendation. It's really about reconnecting with people. And sometimes I'll think about somebody I liked and I'll just write one. But I actually specifically look at something when looking at people's LinkedIn profiles. I look to see if they've given more than they've received. And I know I'm in like the way, way low percentages. I'm probably the less than 1% on that, but I will look to see if people have given more than they've received.
That's a good thing. Can you see that? Because I know you can hide recommendations, or does it always disclose like the number given? Is that how that works now? Okay. I wasn't sure. I know there was some stuff because I received recommendations back in the day that had like spelling errors and all kinds of stuff, and I didn't want to be a jerk to people, but I did end up hiding some of that, so they're not actually shown. And I didn't know if it shows you how much you've given to other people as a default. So
Yeah, for ones you've received that you haven't posted, I'm sure they probably are not counting those.
okay, we got one question here. Let's do this question, and then I imagine we'll probably have to wrap it up because we're over the hour that I said this would take. So this is from Gene. It says, any advice on transitioning experience and training to a new industry? So if you're shifting industries, what's your take on that, Jeff?
Yeah, I worry very, very little about transitioning from one industry to another. My bigger concern is like somebody who's a marketing manager wants to all of a sudden be a product manager. That to me is a much scarier ask than saying like, oh, well, I'm a program manager for X company. I'm a program manager in finance and I want to move to program management and tech. It's like, I think it's the same. You might want to learn a little bit of the lingo, the nuances of different industries, but I'm more interested in your role knowledge than your industry specific knowledge personally.
But if somebody says like, okay, I'm a product manager in industrial plastics, and that's been my career for the last 15 years, but now I want to be a project manager in soft toys for children, do you consider that like where you would need to transition, your skills or rewrite things differently to cater to that? Because I've gone across 5 industries, and I've really encountered a lot of resistance from people that, they're looking at you. Yeah, you got the skills, but you're from a different industry. And I know that that's a real concern.
It's a great question, Bill. I always try to flip it and look at the positive. Oh, absolutely. I was dealing in plastics for a long time, and some of the lessons that I've learned in big plastics are actually incredibly applicable to soft toys. And I believe that these are 3 key areas where those insights could bring real value to your organization, right? And so I like hiring people who are non-industry because they're going to bring a different, unique lens. And that lens to me is way more valuable than the industry experience personally. But again, I know not everybody thinks that way.
I'm glad that I pushed that with you because I thought that was a outstanding answer. The way you phrased it like that, I thought that's a great template to structure your kind of answer. You give reasons, and it's kind of hard I think it would be hard for someone to argue with that because it seems like you've put a lot of thought into it. And if you draw these parallels, it's like, hey, maybe it's really prepared you to bring something unique to this role. So I thought that was great. We're getting a lot of questions, but unfortunately, I think we have to wrap it up. I said this would be an hour, so we're going to stick. Well, we're not going to stick to it, but we're going to at least cap it here. Thanks for joining me, Jeff. I think this is great. I think you provided a really interesting perspective, and you really surprised me with the whole comment about posted jobs versus networking. So I was not prepared for that. I thought that's really cool that you're sort of commenting and putting your content out on in that area too. I think more people need to tune into the networking side of things. So that's great. Any kind of parting sort of final comments there before we wrap this up?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you again, Bill, so much for having me. And obviously, I've known who you are for a long time because you have such a huge following on YouTube. So I'm just total gratitude on my end to even be chatting with you today. And the biggest thing I'll leave with everybody is just understand that the translation of hours spent in job search, interview practice, and prep, nothing will change your life more. We need to put in so few hours to change our lives. And being a great interviewer in particular, that can make us millions more over our life. And you can give all those millions back to charity. So it's not all about money being negative and bad, but it's just if you want to go be a MBA player, you're going to just have to practice for 20 or 30 or 40,000 hours. We can practice for job interviews for 20 or 30 hours. Maybe I know that's a lot, but that can completely change our lives. Just double down, put in the work. And then I would also just leave it at people are not dedicating enough time to LinkedIn. LinkedIn works for you when you're not doing anything. And honestly, Google came after me. They found me. They got me the job. I didn't do anything. I never applied. And so I always use that as my story to say LinkedIn is really powerful. And it's just, and of course, that coupled with networking, it's just not being utilized enough.
Yes, I understand that you are also a coach. Like, you're an interview coach, so people can hire you to help them prepare for interviews and that kind of thing. Do you want to just briefly mention that kind of thing?
Yeah, I'm not. You can see I'm not a big plugger of myself, but I do one-on-one interview coaching, one-on-one career strategy like resume, LinkedIn, and one-on-one negotiation coaching. And I have an interview course, and I have an AI practice interview app that you can interact with as well. It's all available at practiceinterviews.com. Thanks so much for letting me plug, Bill.
Yeah, so everybody can see Jeff's handle on the screen. That is the literal name of your YouTube channel, I believe, right? That's the exact title of your YouTube channel. Check out Jeff's channel. There is also a link. If you're watching this on my channel, there is a link in the description box to Jeff's channel. Check it out. Jeff's got a lot of videos there. Jeff is a recruiter and has worked for 10 years as a recruiter, including working for Google. So he's got a lot of special insights for that stuff. So a lot of wisdom and a lot of great advice. So check out Jeff's channel and some of his videos there. And if you are looking to have an interview coach work with you, check out Jeff once again. He provides those services. I do not provide those services. Jeff does. So that would be a great place where you can get some help in working with you to improve your interview skills like we were just talking about. So thanks again, Jeff. This has been awesome. I will be back on my channel next week at the same time with another episode of Career Expert Roundtable. Until then, thanks everyone. Take care.